The international system is facing accelerated transitions as competition between the great powers intensifies. Join this important dialogue with the Kingston Consortium on International Security.
It is my honor and pleasure to welcome General Eyre to KCIS 2022. The cliche is that there are some folks who do not need introductions, and the Chief of Defence Staff of Canada is one of those. And so I'm not going to introduce him in that way, but I did want to take the opportunity to thank General Eyre because he has been, over the years, such a strong supporter of KCIS. This is now his fourth appearance at our conference. Repeat offender. And I just wanted to say, on behalf of the director of the Center for International and Defense Policy, Hugh Siegel, and I think I can speak on behalf of the other partners in the Kingston Consortium on International Security, to just simply say how very appreciative we are of the consistent support that General Eyre, in a variety of different positions, and now most recently as Chief of Defense Staff, have had for this particular conference. And with that, let me welcome General Eyre to the podium for the fourth time.
Thank you. Thank you. No, thanks for that kind introduction, Dr. Nossal, and good afternoon, everybody. Bonjour tout le monde. I'd like to start off by first acknowledging that the land on which we are gathered here today is the traditional Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat territory. And I want to thank you again for the invitation to speak to you once again today. And I look forward to this gathering every year. And more so than the speech, I look forward to the questions and answers because they are always stimulating. I'd like to congratulate our KCIS partners, the Center for International and Defense Policy here at Queen's, the Canadian Army Doctrine and Training Center, the Strategic Studies Institute from my old alma mater, the U.S. Army War College, and NATO Defense College, and all of the organizers for putting together everything here today. You know, every year this event brings together a diverse group of people: military, civilian, government, private sector, industry, academia, and especially students. And it's fantastic to see so many students out here who all share common desires. And that's the safety and security of the people of Canada and the strength and stability of our vital alliances. And the preservation and promotion of the rules-based international order that has led to so much peace and security over the years. You know, a lot has changed since I spoke to this forum last year. A lot has changed in the rules-based international order, and that order is more fragile than ever. So this conference knocks down silos, provides a forum where we can share our best thinking on the most critical, vexing concerns of our times. Now, this type of integration is key to our collective efforts to maintain that stability and security, that peace and prosperity. And it's only going to become more important as the security situation in our world further degrades and our challenges become more daunting. It's been said many times, but it deserves to be restated that our world is volatile and dangerous, and more so than at any time since the fall of the Soviet Union and perhaps since the end of the Second World War. Competitors are vying for influence, threatening that international order that has been the pillar of global stability and security, and for the most part, peace in Europe since 1945. Russia's illegal, unjustifiable, and ill-conceived invasion of Ukraine, and China's increasingly aggressive and assertive activity in the Indo-Pacific region are obvious examples. But there are other actors, both state and non-state, also pursuing their geopolitical agendas in the gray zone that exists just below the threshold of armed conflict, including exerting foreign influence, carrying out espionage, and spreading disinformation. Entre-temps, les nouvelles technologies modifient le caractère des conflits.
So new technology modifies the character of conflicts. Geographic isolation that Canada has benefited from for so long no longer offer the same benefit as in the past. And we must be ready to deal with adversaries and competitors, not only in the sea, on land, and in the air, but also online in the information age, and probably in other domains to be discovered in the coming years. Demographic change, massive migration, cultural conflict, and political polarization destroy social cohesion in many countries.
And climate change, perhaps the ultimate disruptor, looms over all. As always, the theme of this year's conference is timely and its subject matter is urgent, because all these concerns are overlapping and at play in our Arctic. As I said at this conference last year, it has become abundantly clear that when we think about what it means to defend Canada and Canadians, we need to consider the increasing domestic deployments demanded of our armed forces. It's also becoming very clear that defending Canada and Canadians also demands a powerful commitment to upholding Canada's Arctic sovereignty and preserving the security and stability of the entire circumpolar region. All of this was central to discussions this past summer, this last August in St. John's, when I hosted and met with my counterparts from other Arctic nations for the first Arctic Chiefs of Defense meeting since Russia invaded Crimea in 2014. Present were the Chiefs of Defense from Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, and the United States. And our Swedish counterpart was there in spirit, invited, but could not attend. And for obvious reasons, Russia was not invited.
What is sad, during these times where Arctic becomes more and more important and its stability and security are more vital, and where the needs of each concerned countries is to work together are even greater, Russia has chosen to withdraw from the table of nations. Nevertheless, this was a very productive meeting.
We decided to begin meeting again on a regular basis and continue to advance our shared commitment to cooperation, collaboration, and information sharing in the region. The Arctic is a long way from the halls of power, distant from the great power capitals of the world. But make no mistake, it is a region of growing geopolitical importance and an arena of increasing strategic competition. We know Russia sees the Arctic as both vital to its security and economic interests. It already has the largest military presence in the north, a presence that continues to grow in both offensive and defensive capacities. This is obviously troubling, given its disregard for peace, order, and the sanctity of its neighbors' borders. And its illegal war in Ukraine has important implications for the Arctic. Finland and Sweden joining NATO will fundamentally alter the geopolitics of the region and increase focus on NATO's northern flank. It's easy to direct all of our attention on Russia, given the current war in Ukraine, but the challenge of China looms large. It's probably longer term, and it'll be a focus for a long time to come. China has declared itself a near Arctic nation and has its own ambitions in the north, in particular using the Northern Sea route through Russia's Arctic to import energy and export goods as part of its polar Silk Road vision. One theme that arose at our Arctic Chiefs of Defense meeting in St. John's was that Russia is intent on defying the international rules-based order, while China, more subtly, is trying to disrupt it with the intent of changing that order to its advantage. Les activités commerciales et scientifiques menées
Scientific and commercial activities from China advance their strategic and military objectives and vice versa. Other countries have also military interests in Arctic. For example, Belgium, France, Germany, Poland, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Spain, Italy.
Now, they're all allies and partners, but this does not change the fact that the more interest there is in the Arctic, the more complex the politics of the region become. The increased geopolitical interest in the Arctic is largely driven by the effects of climate change and improved access to natural resources and shipping routes. And some of this sense of improved access is accurate, but some of it is more perception. And for example, the Northwest Passage is passable. Our Navy's HMCS Harry DeWolf navigated it last year, but given volatile ice conditions, a short navigation season, and lack of support infrastructure, among other issues, it's unlikely to become a viable shipping route until the latter half of this century. And nonetheless, we will continue to see increased activity in the North for commercial purposes, for scientific research, and even increasingly for tourism. And with increased activity comes increased risks of accidents, miscalculation, and escalation, and added demands on our Canadian Armed Forces. Climate change and the growing strategic competition are examples of threats to the Arctic and its people, and the former demands improvements to infrastructure in response. We also have to be prepared to respond to threats coming through the Arctic, most obviously missiles and their launch platforms, and thanks to new technology deployed by adversaries from great distances away. Our response to this must be, among other things, developing our domain awareness, including through initiatives funded through our defense policy, Strong, Secure, Engaged, and as announced in June, NORAD modernization. Enfin, nous devons être en mesure
NORAD. And also we must be able to react efficiently to the threats coming from the Arctic itself. More there is activity in the north, the more the risks of accidents linked to dangers in the field and to extreme climate are high.
This means greater search and rescue capacity, such as improved domain awareness in the north through NORAD modernization to support armed forces operations, including in support of SAR. That terrain up there makes climate, that terrain and climate makes Canada's north one of the most challenging environments in the world for military operations. The north makes up 4/5 of Canada's territory. For our Navy, it contains 75% of our coastlines. That's the area that Joint Task Force North is responsible for. 25% of the global Arctic. Only Russia has more. And this part of Canada contains less than half of 1% of Canada's population. Now, to use an analogy, that would be the same as spreading the population of the city of Kingston here across Europe. So you get the idea. And the infrastructure to support operations is spread just as thin. What we can't build, we have to bring. So working up there requires self-sustaining forces, strong supply chains and logistics capacity, and an overabundance of advanced planning. It's in our own country, but every deployment up there is considered a strategic deployment. Extreme conditions can hamper sensor and communications capabilities. Another challenge, given that situational awareness and communications are key to success in any theater, and especially one so dispersed as the Arctic. So in this complex and challenging environment, we have a multi-pronged role, with the various elements combining to advance our overarching mission in the region, upholding our Arctic sovereignty and protecting the safety and security of Canadians. We need to be a sustained and visible presence in the north. We need to maintain constant domain awareness. We need to be steadfast in supporting our allies and partners, fulfilling our international commitments, in particular to NORAD and to NATO. We need to support our domestic partners, working with the Canadian Coast Guard, the RCMP, and provincial and territorial partners in search and rescue efforts, and contributing to a whole of government approach to support economic opportunities in resilient communities in the north, and advancing reconciliation with Indigenous peoples who have lived there for generations. To achieve this, we have about 300 members assigned to Joint Task Force North, mostly headquartered in Yellowknife, with some stationed in Iqaluit and Whitehorse. About 1,800 Canadian Rangers from one Canadian Ranger Patrol group live in communities throughout the region. And since 2013, we've maintained a Canadian Armed Forces Arctic Training Center in Resolute Bay to ensure our people are ready to operate in these Arctic conditions. The Air Force's 440 Squadron, based in Yellowknife, provides transport and search and rescue functions with their Twin Otter aircraft. Our Air Force, in collaboration with NORAD, also maintains forward operating locations in Yellowknife, Inuvik, and Iqaluit, and extending our reach into the far north. And members stationed in CFS Alert, less than 800 kilometers from the North Pole, gather signals intelligence. So it's not a large footprint by any means for that vast region in Canada's north. So to support their efforts, personnel posted north of 60 draw on assets positioned in the south. The first 3 of 6 new Arctic and offshore patrol ships have been delivered, and they've already begun increasing our visibility and presence in the north, as we saw in Operation Nanook this summer. And the Navy's ability to operate in northern waters will be amplified by the new naval facility at Nanisivik when it comes online. 4 Arctic response company groups with expertise built up over years. And if you haven't seen them in operation, you'd be very impressed with the depth of experience they've got. They're drawn from our reserves, and they're ready to support northern operations on a relatively short notice. Our search and rescue operations in the north are coordinated by joint rescue coordination centers in Victoria, Trenton, and Halifax. And the radar stations up there that form part of the North Warning System are monitored by NORAD from 22 Wing in North Bay. To most Canadians, though, the most visible presence, or the most visible sign of our presence and capabilities in the north, is Operation Nanook, our annual military exercise or series of exercises in the north. L'Opération Nanook met en évidence notre expertise.
Nanook highlights our expertise in terms of operations in the Arctic, our devotion to security in the Arctic, and our general presence north of the 60th parallel. This operation shows our ability to deploy our armed forces in the north and to maintain them there in strength.
Practical benefits to our members are equally important. Pilots gain experience flying in difficult conditions. Divers work under the ice. Land forces exercise their Arctic survival skills. Through Operation Nanook, we strengthen our capabilities and readiness for northern operations, enhance our domain awareness, have a visible presence, and identify areas where we need to get better. We work with defense scientists to improve our understanding of the environment and develop ways to increase our effectiveness in it. We work with our partners in the federal and territorial governments, building capacity for interagency and whole government cooperation. And we work with allies to increase our interoperability with other militaries. We invite any and all allies to join us, and there is increasing interest. Still, the assets in place to defend the north and southern Canada from threats coming through the north are not nearly enough. I've said this before, but our Arctic sovereignty is not threatened today. It won't be threatened tomorrow. It won't be threatened next year. But given the geopolitical landscape, the effect of climate change, and our low population in that region, we could find our hold on sovereignty tenuous in the decades ahead. So the long-term security and stability of the Arctic requires us to take a long-term view. Developing capabilities, procuring assets, and establishing infrastructure all take time. We must work to ensure that those capabilities are in place so that we have them ready when we need them in the decades ahead. It brings to mind an old saying: if you want to grow a tree, or if you want a grown tree in your front yard, the best time to plant it was 20 years ago. The next best time is right now. So Canada's Arctic sovereignty and security features prominently in our defense policy and remains a critical consideration as we continue to update that policy. Now, given how much and how quickly the world has changed in the 5 years since the government launched Strong, Secure, and Engaged, the budget 2022 committed to immediately investing in NORAD modernization, as well as to reviewing SSC to better reflect the current defense and security climate. Now, Canada's goals to remain strong at home, secure in North America, and engaged in the world, those have not changed. And you could argue those haven't changed really since the Second World War. The ways in which we achieve those enduring goals must adapt, however, to those enduring realities, or those current realities. And we are making a priority of moving ahead with NORAD modernization. The most recent federal budget calls for even greater presence, capacity, and domain awareness in the Arctic, calls that are echoed in Canada's Arctic and Northern Policy Framework. As
I mentioned it earlier, we can no longer count on our geographic isolation to ensure our defense. Whereas technology in terms of arms and the existential threats for international order, rule-based order are eroding quickly.
Into and through the Arctic is of paramount importance to NORAD. And we cannot separate advancing our defense interests in the North with advancing the modernization of NORAD. Now, when it was established, NORAD's raison d'etre was to defend North America against the threat of Soviet bombers, which had to penetrate our airspace to deliver bombs. And later, this included defense against Soviet cruise missiles, or Soviet missiles writ large. Our investment in continental defense wound down essentially with the end of the Cold War. But Russia has significantly invested in long-range aviation and the capability of its cruise missiles. And it also has the means to threaten Canada in other domains. Its submarine fleet is sophisticated and carries weapons of great concern. In the cyber domain, Russia is one of the world's most significant agitators, capable of threatening our critical infrastructure and economy. And Russia has demonstrated irresponsible behavior in the space domain, such as the destructive anti-satellite tests last fall that created space debris and polluted that environment for decades and generations to come. And with the Arctic being a potential avenue for attack on North America, it is imperative that we work even harder to improve our Arctic infrastructure, surveillance, and rapid response capabilities. So Canada and the US have agreed to work together to modernize NORAD. The current plans call for necessary improvements to command and control using advanced technology, including artificial intelligence, to enhance our ability to process and interpret incoming data at a high rate of efficiency. They will improve our air domain awareness in the form of next generation over-the-horizon radar and additional funding to support the development of the satellite communications platforms called for in our defense policy. They include significant funding to upgrade NORAD forward operating locations and acquire additional air-to-air refuelers to enable more agile and sustainable operations in the North. This will all build on the work already underway through SSC, including the Arctic and offshore patrol ships, future fighter aircraft, remotely piloted aerial systems, and enhancements to the training and effectiveness of the Canadian Rangers. Still, with all of that, we're nowhere near where we need to be with regard to our Arctic security. The formidable challenge of continental defense in this time of accelerated change demands we heighten our capabilities in every domain. At sea, we need to continue to develop our domain awareness through the development of new solutions for underwater surveillance and extending and improving our own submarine capability. In space, we need assured access to broadband, high-speed polar satellite communications to facilitate command, control, and communications capabilities, and to improve our operational reach and effectiveness. In cyber, we need to continue to invest in the ability to defend our networks and to strike back when warranted. And on land, we need to amplify our ability to deploy strategically to the farthest reaches of our territory and to develop operational support capabilities to enable a persistent presence in the North by capabilities deploying from the South. The very fact that we have a capability and we exercise it routinely at the extremities of our nation sends a message and changes the calculus of adversaries. Now, this is far from a comprehensive list of needs, but it's an indication of just how much more there is to be done. To defend the North and Canada's interests generally, we need to better understand what's happening in the North. To do that, we need to be able to monitor it effectively. And this means a greater presence, both physically and technologically, in every domain. We also need to develop greater resilience to better respond to natural disasters and adapt to the effects of climate change. We need to continue strengthening our relationship with our allies and partners, both formally through multinational efforts like the Arctic Chiefs of Defense Forum and Operation Nanook, through clear and constant communication with other Arctic nations and nations with Arctic interests. In the evolving Arctic security environment, transparency, openness, and cooperation are absolutely essential. We need to do what we can to keep tensions down in that region. We also need to work more closely with domestic partners, including provincial, territorial, and Indigenous governments. NORAD modernization is a fresh opportunity to engage with these communities, advancing reconciliation through both engagement and collaboration. But it cannot and must not be the end, because improvements to Northern security and Northern infrastructure benefit us all. So in closing, Canadians are a Northern people. The Arctic is part of who we are. It's part of our national character. Defending its stability, security, and our sovereignty there is more vital and more challenging than ever before. It's a key front in the struggle to preserve our rules-based international order. Its strategic importance is greater than at any time since the Cold War. And climate change is forever altering the physical nature of the far north, driving interest and activity that was not possible in previous times. Advances in technology have reduced any defensive advantages created by its vastness. Russia's betrayal of international principles and conventions and the resulting redrawing of NATO's borders are having a significant effect on the geopolitics of the North. We must meet these challenges, and we will, on the strength of strategic investments, collaborative relationships, innovation, and modernization, and the skill, passion, and resolve that the proud members of the Canadian Armed Forces bring to their work every single day. Merci beaucoup, miigwech. Thank you. And now I look forward to your questions.
General Eyre has kindly agreed to take some questions, and so yes, we have a microphone on the way.
Thank you so much. I'm cluing in on your mention of, I'm Jeff Evamy-Hill from Archipelago of Design, cluing in on your long-term vision and perspective. How do we persuade or show leaders and show don't tell leaders about long-term planning and perspective, because it's so hard with the evolving perspective and not responding ad hoc to various crises. So how do we better communicate this long-term vision and planning?
Hey, thanks for that question. It's something that we wrestle with, and quite frankly, don't have the answer, because attention spans are short, and what we're talking about is something that is difficult to fathom because of the security threats that go into the future. So, drawing the logic trail, here's the threats, here are the trends that we see, here are the capabilities that are required, here are the investments that are required to address those threats. That's an educational effort, and we have to rest on that logic, on the facts as we see them, and the best predictions of what the future security environment is going to look like, and put it in those stark terms. Is our sovereignty worthy of defense? If so, here's what's required to defend it.
Thank you. Yes. Is there a mic over here?
Thank you, Madeline Redfern from Iqaluit Nunavut. Most of the last 2 days, we've also focused on the value and the need to ensure the infrastructure investments that are made in the North, not that is not just for sovereignty, security purposes, must also be for the benefit of our communities. As you well know, a lot of our infrastructure from telecommunications, energy, and transportation is in critical condition, or 80% of our water infrastructure is in Port of Bad, runways that are too short, unpaved. The city of Iqaluit, the capital of Nunavut, is on its 6th year of a water crisis, both with respect to the quantity of water or even the contamination of water. I mean, the list goes on, and the conversations that we've had with the military the last couple of days, we've heard it, is that the investments can't just be for defense. It must be multi-user, multi-purpose, and multi-beneficial. So I didn't hear an awful lot of that in your speech. I think, one could say it was slightly inferred, but I would recommend that messaging be strengthened, because that internal sort of communication that happens within the federal family with the other departments, I said, Department of Environment and Climate Change, Department of CIRNAC, all those departments need to understand that those investments that they're making, at this point in time, are not necessarily the most strategic or the smartest investments for our communities, and equally not the smartest ones for defense either.
No, point taken, and we're in violent agreement. I think this needs to be win-win as we invest in infrastructure. It's got to be dual use. It's got to be multi-use. One of the initiatives that we are pushing forward on is what's called operational support hubs, where we establish austere facilities. Think airstrip. Think some austere accommodations, port facility if it's close to the water. That creates economic opportunities for the population of the North. As we bring in communication capabilities, think broadband access for that community as well. I think higher tech jobs to help maintain those facilities. So there's lots and lots of possibilities here, but it absolutely has to be in conjunction with local communities and have a win-win solution here.
Thank you. Yes.
General, I'm almost embarrassed to ask you this question, but I'm going to ask you anyway.
Identify yourself.
My name is Bob Lavigne, and
Okay, that's a great start.
Christmas Day 2014, I sat at Kim Rudd's Christmas table with Jerry Butts and the late lamented Gary Woodall, and we rewrote your veterans policies, including education, restoration of the offices, and so forth. Now, I've been listening at this conference very carefully as the Canadian military spoke glowingly of the capacities of the Canadian Rangers. And at the same time, I've heard that they are seriously inadequately compensated for their work. And they are a particular pivot, a foundation of our sovereignty in the North. And so I'd like to know what you want from us, from me, from politicians, to have as a resource to improve their circumstances, because we have learned today, I think it was, perhaps yesterday, that their compensation basically extends to the equivalent of a loaf of bread and a head of cauliflower a day. And I'd like to see that as a Canadian remedied. Thank you.
Okay. So on the subject of Rangers and improving their lot, about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, we embarked on a program called the Ranger Enhancement Program. It's run out of the Army, and it's focused on what you're talking about, improving their conditions. Firstly, a number of policies in place, the administration and the financial remuneration of them, what they're given to use their equipment, their snowmobiles, their ATVs, et cetera, to make sure that they're getting the fair market rate for the use of those vehicles, and if there's broken, if they are broken, to make sure they're covered. But there's other aspects as well. We got to go beyond and take a look at the roles, tasks, missions of the Rangers have right now. They are, and traditionally have been, our eyes, ears, and guides at the extremities of this country. As the situation changes, does that role do those roles and tasks change as well? We saw over the course of the pandemic, them being used in non-traditional ways. How do we support them when they're doing ground search and rescue and they come across grisly scenes and they're on duty and having to recover? How do we medically support them? So there's a number of different issues that are in the process of being addressed through this enhancement program. The training, we used to have, the assumption going in was Rangers would use the training, the life experience they have from living off the land. They would not have to be trained coming into the program. As society changes, perhaps that underlying assumption is no longer valid and more training is required. So there's a whole host of various aspects of the Ranger program that are under review right now.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hey, sir. Scott Clancy, ex-NORAD dude. Got a question for you based upon yours and my experience with the away game versus the home game.
Yeah, hopefully it's not a question about bumbling through the woods in Cold Lake.
No, sir. I told that story earlier.
Okay.
I did.
But we didn't get lost.
No, we did not. You did say this is why you like being in the Army, and I said that's why I joined the Air Force. That's correct. So, SSE, and you said that the principles and the foundational elements of our defense policy haven't changed since World War II. Must defend Canada, must defend North America, and a choice.
Yeah.
SSE. However, you and I have also seen, and our American allies are still rooted in this, the away game is still preempting the home game in that we deploy forces for expeditionary operations. The Army's managed readiness plan, the Air Force's managed readiness plan, and whatever the Navy does look identical. Exped operations on top of. So it looks like ESS instead of SSE. So my question to you is, if the Arctic is as important as we've seen from our Indigenous populations across the board on this conference, then will the upcoming defense policy update that you're looking at right now make pragmatic changes to the force posture and readiness and the managed readiness plans to put that emphasis back on North American defense and the Arctic?
Yeah, so what you talk about speaks to our strategic culture as well. Since really since the First World War, we have had an expeditionary mindset, and certainly since the end of the Second World War, we've been focused, and we join up to travel the world. This is for the most part travel the world and address the away games as opposed to the home games. That's unusual when we take a look at militaries around the world, who for the most part are focused on defending their own territory first and foremost. And that speaks to the benefit we've had of our splendid isolation. But that strategic culture needs to change more. As the expectation needs to be, we're going to be, as you join this organization, you're going to be spending more time on continental operations. You're going to be spending more time deploying to the north. You're going to be spending more time responding to threats to our own sovereignty. So that is in the decades ahead. We need to change that focus. That's not to say that the away game goes away, because we have to be contributors to global security as well, commensurate with what we see as our role in the world. But more focus, I agree, more focus on the S in SSE. So what does that mean in terms of policy update? Well, I talked about some of the capabilities that we need to invest in. Along with capabilities comes force structure. Along with that force structure comes the requirement to employ people in those capabilities in the geographic region of Canada.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Richard Vines, British Army Liaison Officer. General, against a backdrop of reconstitution and prioritizing individual training over collective training, what NATO involvement would you like to see in both supporting Canada, but also in learning from Canadian expertise in the High North?
No, so another good question. We've got to continue to work with our NATO partners on sharing those lessons, sharing exercises, developing those relationships. You were at the UK exchange liaison officer meeting the other, 2 weeks ago? And I think I said to you at that point, one of the greatest values that you are experiencing right now, one of the greatest benefits are the relationships that you make. And so as we exercise more together, as we train more together in these austere environments, we can share lessons, but more importantly, we develop those relationships that are going to pay huge dividends in the years forward. In the context of reconstitution, yes, we have prioritized individual training, but that does not mean that that collective training goes away. We have to maintain a certain level of collective training to ensure, one, that our foundational skills don't atrophy, and two, that our readiness is there for our NATO commitments. It's just where we're going to take more risk. So yeah, we're going to reduce some of that collective training, but it's not going away completely. And it's not black and white. It's not binary. We have to find that that spot in the middle and thread the needle as to what the right balance is going to be.
Thank you. Yes, Drea.
Thank you, sir. Andrew Schron from the University of Manitoba. I remember before, one of the concerns was that the Canadian Armed Forces was not going to be the lead in the Arctic. They would be in a support role. Now, they may be changing with strategic competition, but I was just wondering what kind of conversations you have with your civilian counterparts for them to see the Arctic as the priority we think it is, and for them to be doing some of the heavy lifting, especially gaining planning and operational capacity.
So Dr. Sharong, a great question. We're starting to see more interest from other departments in this as well. The vast majority of our operations up there have to be interagency by design. So we see interagency interest on Operation Nanook, for example, Coast Guard being involved. Public safety needs to continue to be involved. Other departments need to continue to be involved. So this is evolving, and we'll continue to increase that as we increase our own activities up there, as we increase our own infrastructure up there. We have to bring others along as well. Absolutely essential.
Thank you. Oh, way at the back.
Good afternoon, General. Will Greaves from the University of Victoria. Picking up on Professor Sharon's comment and your response, you've mentioned strong, secure, engaged. Prior to that, we had the Canada First Defence Strategy. We have a number of Arctic-specific policy documents released both under this government and under the previous government. But what we haven't had in many years is a fulsome foreign policy review. In light of the importance of the interdepartmental cooperation that you just stressed, can these defense and Arctic related documents be coherent or effective if they're not integrated into a broader interdepartmental foreign policy review? Thank you, sir.
You're asking a question to get me in trouble, aren't you? Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a common observation and a common challenge that we face as we try to determine where do we focus in the world or at home. And it's an observation that we have made to others as well. And let me leave it at that.
No trouble. One last question.
Are we rounds complete?
I think so. So it just remains for me to ask all of us to thank General Eyre for his comments today, and of course his questions or responses to our questions. Thank you again, and thank you for all your support. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you do as well. Thank you very much. Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate that. So we'll take a 5-minute break here, and then that will permit us to carry on with Brigadier General Birckhead's closing comments for the conference. And when that is complete, we will then carry on with some wrap-up administrative items prior to closing the conference down. Thank you very much. We'll see you in about 5 minutes.
So it's been a very powerful couple of days talking about a really important topic. And it was 2 days well spent, I believe, addressing both challenges and opportunities. And we've come so far, and we have so far to go. So you may recall at the beginning, my statement was regarding the Arctic. It's not an easy argument for taxpayers, corporations, and politicians. And Mr. Goldie Hyder drove that point home. He clearly provided a perspective on competing interests, keeping the region from fully understanding the value proposition, that there are competing interests that do that. In summary, Mr. Hyder hit on similar themes that would carry on throughout the last couple of days. The necessity to engage the indigenous population. Consultation is not enough. The infrastructure or the lack thereof, climate as a significant challenge. And General Eyre also said in his comments, what was his first comment? The climate rules. The need for effective communication. So we have to look at constituencies, businesses, community, lawmakers, the economic imperative. What's in this for me? What's in it for Canada? What's in it for the US? What's in it for our Indigenous people? And the role of business that they must fulfill. And then we turn to 6 excellent panels and that talked about several critical issues. Panel 1 on international security challenges in the North. A significant note to the first panel focusing on Indigenous people. We know now that the respect for human security and economic security is intertwined with national security. I said that in the beginning, and I still think after hearing that panel, it holds true. Panel 1 brought home the points that the Arctic is a shared responsibility. And Dr. Morton reminded us of the Indigenous people and the criticality in a calculus to determine the way forward. And we must remember tribal sovereignty in all we do and operating in the region. The most affected by conflict in the High North are Indigenous people. And further fragmentation of one Arctic is not a notional idea anymore. It is fragmented. How do we deal with that complexity? And then we looked at panel 2, the great powers and the High North. The second panel examined great power competition. The United States recently demonstrated its renewal to focus on the Arctic with establishment of the newest regional study center, Ted Stevens Center for Study of Arctic Security. And we heard from some of the staff there with its mission to advance Arctic awareness and the US DoD Arctic priorities, and to reinforce the rule-based order of the Arctic and to address the impacts of climate change. So that's a lot that they're doing. They physically just opened, so we'll see where that goes, right? As I said, there's a lot of work. The panel's thought on smart power, security cooperation, and bilateral engagement provided a way forward in examining security in the High North in the realm of competition. And then we realized that China has staked out a position in the near Arctic. And so what does that mean? And where's their influence? We only need to pay attention to the international waters, and then we'll realize what they're doing there. As Russia is increasingly weakened, cooperation with China and the Arctic may yield an advantage for China, yet to be seen, but something we should watch. And then we're reminded that China is using science as a way to advance their interests in a region. Is there a true dichotomy? War or peace? Or is it a continuum? Is there a spectrum that we need to consider? And who or what is the appropriate body to consider that spectrum? Is it what we have now? Do we need to remember the problems of the past and not go down that same road? Panel 3 focused on defense capabilities in the North America and the Arctic. When most of us think about security, we generally think of NORAD. And this leading by example, bilateral coordination between Canada and the United States for 65 years has been the model. And yet the longevity of that coordination does not mean it shouldn't be reexamined. So we should feel heartened that we've heard from almost every panel, at least NORAD was whispered, something about NORAD. And then with General Eyre and his comments, doubling down on how important that is. And then General O'Malley gave us a view from the cockpit of the complicated problems and how it looks from the cockpit when we discuss NORAD. Dr. Sharon highlighted a couple of golden threads that I will hit upon, and that's the human security concerns as a pressing matter. And secondly, the seams that exist between NORTHCOM, NORAD, EUCOM, INDOPACOM. Those seams, they're not gaps, but they're seams, and we need to pay attention to those. From exercise coordination to information sharing, again, there's more work to be done. And like all Arctic Council members, the United States styles itself as an Arctic nation. In order to do that, however, the military must be postured to conduct operations in the high north and to have a strategy to do so. And I know we've had questions about what does that mean? Boots on the ground, what are we saying? We've kind of been back and forth about that the whole 2 days, right? We really need to consider where we're going with that. Boots on the ground, what does that mean? And how many, how large? Colonel Clark, War College, provided insights about the Army's development of the Arctic strategy and the Army Arctic War Game, and we use these to test concepts there. From an operational view, the challenges are immense and the answers are still in the making. From frostbite and superbugs emerging from the permafrost, the sensors on the ground faced immense challenges. Additional investments are needed. How can we not operate in our own territory? General Peltier said, focused on the tactical and operation land forces. Golden threads from his comments include capability development requires joint civil military coordination. There is a need for all fronts and services to increase their readiness. We must consider areas of cooperation, sustainment, command and control, and interoperability. And I will tell you, interoperability is the key word, interoperability. Through, by, across. Diplomacy was our fourth panel, and we looked at diplomacy and international cooperation. Our panel on diplomacy and international cooperation offered still more perspectives on regional international issues. The war in Ukraine has also affected the Arctic Council, which had suspended operations. The indigenous people who were most affected by this decision were not involved in the process. We touched on multilateral issues of various indigenous peoples and what the growing Cold War between Russia and the West, what that means, or the hot war between Russia and Ukraine, what that means. The slightest amount of research or inquiry shows that indigenous people are ripe to engage in energy diplomacy. Just takes a little look, and I bet they'll come. Cost in infrastructure dollars is significant, but the cost to North America's security and our way of life is more costlier. Foreign investments are real. We have seen it in Africa. We have seen it around the world where there are minerals and resources that are plentiful. Let's not repeat the missteps of the past. Fortunately, we also heard a few action-oriented items such as smart cable, again, back to NORAD and modernization of NORAD, the NATO climate change and the security action plan. All those are things that are way ahead and we should keep our eye on. We should actually look to one another and say, you're my accountability partner here. Let's see where we go with that. And then we had panel 5 on joint security. While most presenters focused on the operational and strategic level, one panel looked at the tactical level, and this would be it. This panel examined joint force employment beyond missiles of NORAD and considered how do we deploy our forces on the ground. And we still agree that that's a hard one and we have to continue to look at that. We heard from the US Marine Corps, who developed operations in Europe's northern flank for decades, the lessons learned there. And despite the formidable strength that units possess, there's still nothing like working and operating in the Arctic. And we heard about operating in that environment by Colonel Souza and the challenges there. And I think it's appropriate about here to quote one of our panel members earlier, and she said, nothing about us with us, nothing without us, nothing that affects us without us. And I think that is key. And all of the things that I've mentioned before that we talked about, the us being the indigenous people. And then panel 6, strategies for the future. Our final panel looked at the future, looked at United States and Canada and the NATO allies, and how should we plan for the Arctic strategies in the future. And they helped us pull that together. I would say that General Eyre actually pulled it together nicely, bringing back, talking about some of the complexities, the climate change rules, what do we need to do? Again, deployment of forces on the ground, and then talking about the threats from sea and missiles. A couple of golden threads that I thought that he mentioned that we should remember, and he did say this, is that Canada needs to fulfill its international commitments. Canada needs to reconcile with Indigenous people, and Canada, it needs to be persistent in their presence. So I think those are some golden threads we can take away from that. I want to thank very much our partners, the Canadian Army Doctrine and Training Center, the NATO Defense College, but especially the Center for International Defense Policy of Queen's University. CIDP is not only a valued partner, but also a perennial host of us in beautiful Kingston. And I did enjoy myself, thank you. I would specifically like to thank Dr. Howard Combs, Brian Houtman, and intern Oliver Day. Where's Oliver? For all their hard work in making this reality. And we all owe a great debt to the powerhouse behind the scene, Maureen Bartram. Thank you, Maureen, if she's in here. Thank you. So without her, this conference wouldn't have taken place, and she responded to all my email. And finally, I would like to thank Dr. Stephanie Von Lucke for her guidance and her leadership over the past several years. It's going to be tough to see her go on to a new assignment, but we welcome Dr. Hugh Siegel as the new CDIP director. The Kingston Consortium is international security. The Kingston Consortium on International Security, the Strategic Studies Institute of the Army War College, the Center for International Defense Policy of Queens, and all of you have certainly modeled international dialogue and championed U.S.-Canadian coordination regarding the Arctic and the strategic security issues. We have used the last 2 days to set a new azimuth and question assumptions, explore options, reset expectations. With this expanded framework, again, I challenge you. All of the work highlighted here is very important. However, if we do not take advantage of these opportunities to address what we've had as missteps or an opportunity not to act, then shame on us. We should not sit in our silos of interest, but work across silos to ensure that everything that we talked about today is addressed to ensure that we have security in the High North. And I thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that great wrap up. As I indicated, just some closing administrative items. First and foremost, content that will be made available by the various presenters will be posted on the CASIS site, and I'll give that site here shortly in a couple of days' time. As Dr. Lynch alluded to during his moderated panel, there will also be a forthcoming executive summary within a couple of days and weeks. Following that, a conference report, and then the CASIS 2022 edited volume in the near future. And then interspersed in that, there will no doubt be various papers that will be published based on the discussions that we've had here over the past 2 days. All of those can be found at the KCIS.org, thecasis.org. As I said this morning as well, there will also be a survey that will be sent out to all participants, where we really look forward to your feedback as we continue to adapt and enhance what is already a fantastic conference. As we look towards CASIS 2023, dates, topics to be confirmed, given the highly not mobile, but the highly changing, ever-changing environment that we see in front of ourselves. But do keep posted in the casis.org, as I've already mentioned once or twice, as well as CASIS, hashtag CASIS 2023. So watch this space. Looking forward to your continued contribution as it's really the participants, the moderators, the panelists, and all of you here and those out online who really make this a even more deeper conference. So this concludes CASIS 2022. Safe travels to all, and thank you sincerely for everyone for having made this such a great event. Thank you.